If it was Deshaun Watson who was going to be the quarterback in Kansas City for the next 12 years instead of Mahomes, but I believe they would do just as much winning. I don't think you win any less with Deshaun Watson than you do with Mahomes.
It is absolutely crazy to think that Deshaun Watson was once regarded as potentially the best quarterback in the NFL. There were legitimate arguments being made about Watson being better than Patrick Mahomes. Deshaun Watson was so good that the Browns traded a boatload of draft capital and signed him to the largest fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, despite Watson missing the entire 2021 season and facing a suspension in 2022. So it's safe to say that the Browns took the biggest gamble in NFL history on Watson, and honestly, the entire fate of this franchise now rests squarely on his shoulders. Here's how Deshaun Watson has become the quarterback with the most pressure heading into 2024. It was 2020, and life was extremely good for Cleveland Browns fans. First-year head coach Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year. Baker Mayfield looked like he was finally developing into a franchise quarterback, and the Browns won their first playoff game since 1994. Everything was looking up for the team. Meanwhile, in Houston, Deshaun Watson was absolutely lighting the league on fire. He posted the best statistical year of his career as he threw for over 4,800 yards and 33 touchdowns while completing 70% of his passes and posting a passer rating of a 112.4 on the season. Despite Watson's phenomenal play, the Texans struggled immensely as they finished the year with a 4-12 record. This led to Watson requesting a trade heading into 2021. His trade request was unprecedented. It's not often that a team gets the opportunity to acquire arguably a top 3 quarterback in the league who is still only 25 years old. But almost immediately after his trade request was leaked, the allegations started coming out about Deshaun Watson. This obviously made trading Watson extremely complicated, as now there were pending investigations and court hearings regarding the allegations. This would lead to Deshaun Watson missing the entire 2021 season as he dealt with his legal troubles. Back in Cleveland, they failed to replicate the magic they had during the previous year. Baker Mayfield was plagued with a shoulder injury during the entire season, and the Browns finished the year with an 8-9 record. Even though he was injured throughout the year, many people questioned Baker Mayfield's ability to be a franchise quarterback. At the start of the offseason, Browns GM Andrew Berry was asked about the possibility of acquiring another quarterback. In his reply, he said he expected Baker to be their starter in 2022, but followed that by saying, "My job is to assemble the best team possible and to make sure that we're in a position to compete consistently for the division, to be in the playoffs, and ultimately win a championship. That's something that we'll strive to do every year." Essentially what that means is, if the Browns get the opportunity to get someone better than Baker Mayfield, they're gonna do it. In March of 2022, a Texas grand jury decided not to indict Deshaun Watson. This was the first major change regarding Watson's legal matters. Immediately, the Texans began receiving calls about potential trades for Watson, and the Browns were reportedly one of the teams that were scheduled to meet with Deshaun Watson. Just a day after that report came out, Baker Mayfield released a letter essentially saying goodbye to Cleveland. Even though the Browns were reportedly informed that Watson was not going to waive his no-trade clause to play for them, but the Browns ultimately made an offer that Watson simply couldn't refuse. So in a stunning turn of events, Deshaun Watson waived his no-trade clause to become a member of the Cleveland Browns. The deal sent a total of 6 draft picks, including 3 first-round selections to Houston, and it also came with a 5-year, $230 million extension for Watson that was fully guaranteed. This was probably the riskiest and the most all-in move in NFL history. The Browns didn't invest that much money and that much draft capital for Deshaun Watson for them to just be playoff contenders. Andrew Berry made this move with a clear goal of bringing Cleveland their first Super Bowl victory. Going into the 2022 season, it was announced that Deshaun Watson would serve an 11-game suspension. This was a favorable suspension for Watson and the Browns because the consensus belief for a while was that Watson's suspension would last for at least a full season. So by the time Deshaun Watson hit the field in week 13, it had been 700 days since the last time he played in an NFL game. And he looked like a guy who hadn't played NFL football in 700 100 days. Watson finished the season with 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. His passer rating of 79.1 and 58% completion percentage were both career lows, but he kind of gets a pass because what were we supposed to expect from him? For 13 weeks, he wasn't allowed to be with the team, and he hadn't played professional football for 700 days. Obviously, he wasn't going to look the same, but the pressure was on in 2023. Watson had a full offseason with the team and was now in his second year in the offense. It was time to see if he would ever return to his old form or if he was always going to be a shell of his former self. After a rough 2 weeks to start the season, in week 3, it looked like he was starting to become Deshaun Watson once again. In the game against the Tennessee Titans, Watson completed 81% of his passes for 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also posted a passer rating of 123.4. This was undoubtedly his best game as a member of the Cleveland Browns. However, Watson wound up on the injury report the following week due to a shoulder injury that he suffered in the second half of the game. Despite being listed as questionable, Deshaun Watson said that he was planning on playing in week 4. But during pre-game warmups, it was announced that Watson's shoulder was not good enough to go and he would miss the team's matchup against the Ravens. This is where things started to get strange. Reports started coming out that Watson was medically cleared to play, but he decided that he wasn't feeling good enough to suit up. This obviously raised a lot of questions about Deshaun Watson's desire to play football. After all, the guy is guaranteed $230 million. It's hard to tell that guy to put his body on the line for the betterment of the team when he knows he's getting his money regardless. Watson tried to make a return in week 7 against the Colts. However, he looked absolutely atrocious, and after taking a huge hit in the first quarter, Watson didn't return to the game. Afterwards, it was reported that despite clearing concussion protocol, Watson still didn't go back into the game. Watson said he wasn't ready to return in week 7 and he didn't play again until week 9 against the Cardinals. And it finally seemed like the Deshaun Watson injury saga was over and the Browns could finally turn their focus on making a playoff run. And in week 9, it looked like Deshaun Watson and the Browns had finally arrived. In a matchup on the road against the Baltimore Ravens, Watson overcame a troublesome first half and led the Browns to a beautiful second half comeback against their division rivals. Deshaun Watson completed 100% of his passes for 134 yards and a touchdown. He also had an incredible run at the end of the game that set up the Browns' game-winning field goal. However, 3 days later, it was announced that Deshaun Watson was undergoing season-ending surgery to repair a displaced fracture to the glenoid in his shoulder. Apparently, this was unrelated to the rotator cuff strain that he had sustained earlier in the season, and he was injured during week 9 against Baltimore. But now here we are. We're heading into Deshaun Watson's 3rd season with the Browns. The first year was excusable because of how rusty he was and the suspension. Last year is somewhat excusable because he was battling injuries all season. But this year, there's no more excuses. This is a Browns team that made the playoffs last season with a 38-year-old Joe Flacco who they yanked off the couch in the middle of the season. They also had 28% of their salary cap on injured reserve and started 5 different quarterbacks. They still somehow won 11 games. The Browns boast the NFL's best defense, a top 10 offensive line, a strong running game that is now getting Nick Chubb back, a solid receiving core with Amari Cooper, David Njoku, Elijah Moore, and now Jerry Jeudy, who they traded for in the offseason, and they're led by a now 2-time Coach of the Year in Kevin Stefanski. So there's absolutely no excuse for Deshaun Watson this season. On paper, if Deshaun Watson is who he was in 2020, the Browns should be favorites to win the Super Bowl this year. However, this is 2024, and all we've seen from Deshaun Watson is slight flashes of what he used to be. This is the year where he needs to step it up. If he struggles again, he will probably lose his job, and this trade will go down as the worst trade and contract in NFL history. But if he performs, it's not far-fetched to believe that the Browns will be winning the Super Bowl this season. The entire fate of this team rests solely on the performance of Deshaun Watson. Hey everyone, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button as it it will go a long way in helping me create the best quality NFL content for all of you. And in the comments, let me know how you think Deshaun Watson is going to do this season with the Browns. And once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.